Hello, you're on Pablo Spot. I'm George. Welcome to another episode on this series Infrastructure Code for Event-Driven System in AWS. And today, I'll be revisiting my Elasticbeanstalk infrastructure and make the necessary changes to make my infrastructure code production ready. And so if this episode and this channel lines up with your interests, click the subscribe button and join me in this journey of learning by doing. So, let's start coding. So this is the same Git repository that I have been working on for this series. And so first things first, I need to make sure that I have the latest code. So I run git pull. And then I'll create a new branch for my changes for today. So what do I need to make my infrastructure be production ready? So I'm going to cover the very bare minimum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list down all the things that I'm going to be doing. So let me open my main.tf and put the list in there. So this is my list. Let's start with the first one. Separate application deployment from infrastructure deployment. The way my infrastructure code is set up now is that when I make changes to the application and run my Terraform commands, the container is built, pushed to ECR, and then my infrastructure is built too. The problem with this setup is that when I want to make changes to my infrastructure, I'll end up rebuilding my Docker image unnecessarily, push that to ECR, and then rebuild my infrastructure. What I need to do is lift out the building of the Docker image from my code and set it up to have just infrastructure in here. So in my main.tf, I'll remove the Docker registry image resource right at the top of my code, which is this resource. And then I also need to remove the dependency reference inside my local file resource, which is right here. The resource for my ECR at the top needs to be changed, and it has to be translated into a data reference because we're creating this ECR repository outside of the infrastructure deployment. And then open my data.tf. And then instead of resource, I'm going to change this to data. And then I also need to remove the tags property. And then back to my main.tf. I now need to change references to my ECR resource as a data reference. So if I search for anything that has this string, I now need to change this to a data reference. I'm not going to make any changes to my application today, so whatever version of Docker image I already have in ECR will be referenced when I deploy my infrastructure later. I'm also not pushing any Docker images anymore in this infrastructure. So I need to remove the data references that I have for ECR authorization token. So if I go back to my data.tf, I can now get rid of this line. I also need to update my backend.tf. And now I can get rid of that provider that's specific to Docker. And then if I open my providers.tf, I can also get rid of this provider Docker block. So that's the first item done. So let me go back to my main.tf and then go back to my list. On to the next task. So instead of accessing my event-driven application using an Elasticbeanstalk URL, I'll create a proper domain-based URL that I can share publicly. I already have an existing Route 53 hosted zone that I can reuse. So what I need to do is have a data reference to this existing hosted zone. So if I go to my data.tf and then all the way to the end of this file, I'm going to set, and because I've introduced a variable in here, I need to go to my variables.tf and set up the definition. I'm not going to set any default value to make this variable a required input. And then I need to update my main.tf vars and set the value of the variable with the domain that I own. So what I need to do next is head to my main.tf. And then in here, I'll set up a Route 53 record resource for my application endpoint. I've set the name property to derive the value from a variable, so I need to set that definition. So if I go to my variables.tf, again, I'm not going to set any default value to make this as a required input. So let me go back to my main.tf. So in the alias block of the Route 53 record resource, I'm pointing the name to the CNAME property of the Elasticbeanstalk environment. Because I'm pointing this endpoint to this Elasticbeanstalk CNAME, I need to use the right zone ID that's associated to the underlying Elasticbeanstalk infrastructure for that region. So in my data.tf, I'm going to set a data reference to this default resource. So if I go all the way up to my code, and then in my main.tf, I'll point the alias zone ID to this resource. And then in my main.tf vars, I'll set the value for my endpoint name variable. So that's another task done. So if I go back to my main.tf, now on to the next one. Now that I've set up a proper endpoint that will be available publicly, I can now set up TLS to make my endpoint secure. So in my main.tf, I'll create another resource for my AWS certificate. And with my validation setup using DNS, I need to set up Route 53 records and validation resources for my certificate. So I'm going to add new set of resources for this. So with this set of certificate resources, I can now update my Elasticbeanstalk environment to use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add settings block in my Elasticbeanstalk environment that will reference this certificate. So if I go all the way back to my environment block, to make my web application strictly supporting HTTPS or TLS, I need to disable default access to port 80 on my Elasticbeanstalk. So this is a separate setting. That's another task done. So let me go back to my list. These next two tasks are additional settings that I need to add in my Elasticbeanstalk environment. So I need to add settings block in my Elasticbeanstalk environment to enable infrastructure logging as well as rolling update. And so to enable infrastructure logging and then to enable rolling update, so that's the next two tasks done. So let me go back to my list and clean that up. So the final task in the list is to create thumbnail S3 and SQS resources as part of the infrastructure. So firstly, I'll create the S3 bucket for my thumbnails. And then I need to set an S3 policy resource that will allow public read access to the thumbnails inside the S3 bucket. And then I need to revisit the way the environment variables are set inside my Elasticbeanstalk environment. So if I go back to that resource, so this is where I set up the environment variables. I'm going to update this. And then now I'll create my SQS resource. So all the way to the end of my main.tf. And then I need to go back to the settings block for the environment variables and set references to this SQS resource. So let's do that. Now, I'll go to my main.tf vars to check what other environment variables are being passed. So the only environment variable that's missing is the AWS default region. So what I'm going to do is copy that, head back to my main.tf, add that inside my environment variables block, and set the value using the region variable. And now if I go back to my main.tf vars, I can get rid of the whole environment variables map. So that's the last task done. So if I go back to my main.tf, before I stand up my infrastructure, I need to update one more thing. So in my output.tf, I now need to update this to point to the proper domain endpoint URL. So those are all the changes that I need to do. Now let me commit my changes into my branch. Next thing I'll do is deploy this infrastructure. So I got an error in here and it's complaining about line 215 in main.tf. And this is because that property subject alternative names has to be a list instead of a string. So let me just fix that. Now I'm going to run my plan again. And I'm getting another error in here on line 226. And this is because of an incorrect property reference. So this needs to be a domain validation options instead of just validation options. So let's fix that and then run plan again. So I got another error in here on line 243. This is because this needs to be a dot instead of underscore. So let's fix that and then run plan again. So the plan was successful. I'm going to go ahead and run apply. The deployment is done. So let me go ahead and open my browser and access my application. So the application loads fine. Let me go ahead and test the generation of thumbnail. And that page also loads fine. So everything is working. And that's it. In the next episode, I'll wrap up this series with setting up the integration and deployment process. And in the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments below and send me some likes if you find this useful. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like my content and help me spread the word about this channel. Until next time, keep learning and stay safe.